So when mounting a transmission to an engine that is designed not to mount to the engine or not mount in the way that you're doing it, there are a lot of things to consider. And one of those things is your Bellhousing plate or plates, or in this case, as Volkswagen likes to call them, cover plates. Now, the reason that this is an issue is if you take your transmission, right? So we see this is the Bellhousing side of the transmission, right? And then if you take the engine and you mount it to that transmission. So, and this is in a transverse application, right? You have this space right here. So let's call this the early Volkswagens, right? So in the early Volkswagens, what you had was for example, you have the 020 transmission, and then you might have the AVA engine or so on, right? So what the cover plate does in this scenario is it basically covers this hole right here. So what you have inside this area of the bell housing is you have a flywheel. And this flywheel turns very quickly, right? So you don't want stuff getting into here, right? So what they've done is they have a metal plate that goes here. Now that's all fine, right? So if we look at then later on, right, they actually use this engine again. I think it was the 058 block. I'm gonna call it that. They use this engine again later on, right? So we'll take our engine, right? But this time, they used it with what was called the 01E transmission. So we'll draw our transmission. So this is 01E, and this is 020. So when they took this engine, they mounted the 01E transmission, they didn't mount it transversely, right? Which means if you have your car like this, right, the engine was mounted this way. Whereas in this example, the engine is mounted transversely. So when they did this, they changed a number of things. One, the engine was turbocharged, right? And then what they did is they changed the oil pan. So in the earlier applications, the oil pan was basically like this, just like a normal oil pan. It was just this square right here, right? You'll notice there's a space in between the oil pan and the transmission, and it's just kind of this blob that hangs out of the engine. This is how most oil pans are. Later on, what Volkswagen did was now the oil pan it's basically a structural component. So what you have is oil pan coming basically like that. So now your oil pan is connecting the engine and the transmission. It's a cast aluminum oil pan. And you also notice that this oil pan is smaller than this one. It has this slant in one end. And this is because there's chassis components that have to fit under the engine when it was mounted in the Passat. I guess they decided it was cheaper to do it this than redesign the chassis. So what I have is so actually let's go one more example in. So later on then what Volkswagen did for their turbocharged cars is they have a newer 1.8T engine. I think it was a 061 block or something thereabouts. And then in the transverse applications, typically what you'll have is the O2J transmission. And then this is in the transverse applications. And they did the same thing they did here, where the oil pan is cast aluminum, and it is, again, a structural component, meaning it's holding the engine and the transmission together right here, right? So this is all fine. If you want, you can take this engine and transmission, you can put it in a Mark I Volkswagen, and this whole setup will work. Now, what you can also do is you can take this Passat engine. It has a couple of advantages: bigger wrist pins, the head comes with bigger valves, it has and some other design characteristics that make it better for the application I have. Now, you can't take this engine, of course, because with this engine transmission combination is mounted longitudinally, right? In Mark I Volkswagens, the engine is mounted transversely, like they are here. Now, if you want to take this engine and mount it transversely, right, you can use either the O2O transmission or the O2J transmission. But now, when you do that, you can't use this oil pan, because this oil pan is designed to mount to the O1E transmission, right? So so you would think, okay, I'm gonna take the cast aluminum oil pan, right? Because then you keep this whole structural integrity and so on. But this oil pan is designed to mate with 061 block and O2J transmission. It's not designed to mate with 058 block and O2J transmission. So what you can do is you can take, since this is the same block as the earlier engine, what you can do is you can take the 058 oil pan, which was never used with a turbocharger, but it has a larger oil capacity than the turbocharged oil pan because Volkswagen. So what you can do is you take this engine, right, this oil pan, and then this transmission. So then this gives you another problem, right? Because now what you have is you basically have this setup, but now instead of O2O transmission, you have the O2J and you have a turbocharger on it. So you would think that, well, going back, right, inside the transmission or the bell housing, you have this spinning thing called the flywheel, right? And then you have this open area. Well, you would think that you could take the plate from O2O transmission, since it's designed with O2O and 5.8 engine, and just fill in this gap here, right? And you have this gap again because you're using this oil pan that is not a structural component that connects the engine and transmission. You can't do that. The plate doesn't work. Basically what happens is it'll hit the flywheel and you'll have lots of fun sparks and stuff. I know because I did that. So what we'll be doing is using the plates for the O2J transmission, hopefully. And these are designed in such a way that there's a clearance for the flywheel, and I believe this is the lower cover plate. So this is what's going to prevent debris from getting in the bell housing, which would be very bad in rally because it could be a rock or what have you.